Thank you for your time. My name is Beitula. I appreciate you being here. Please keep in mind what we are doing here on Bet On It Shooting from the Hip. We explore human ideas, philosophies, and noteworthy information. This exploration is us thinking aloud, a thought exercise, jumping into ideas and examining them and then re-examining them. You will find that we are prone to using adult language and expressing opinions. In keeping with that, you shouldn't believe anything we say. We are not experts of any kind. We are just having fun with these ideas, philosophies, and information in the hopes that you will find it fun, interesting, and entertaining. We encourage you to invest time in searching out these subjects and coming to your own conclusions. Now on with the shit show. Slim, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. So on today's episode, before we were on camera, we were kind of skirting the issue. So today, it's kind of, I wouldn't call it a part two, but it's kind of uh, like following how to survive the zombie apocalypse. We're following up with a doomsday preppers culture, because what you'll discover, especially in the U.S., is that there's actually quite a significant prepping culture that goes with that's again, it's a subculture. It's not completely mainstream, but and there's not a lot of statistics on it because most of it is like private, and a lot of the stuff that you couldn't get stats on, like things like camping gear and that sort of thing. And a lot of prepping is just having tools and utensils to be able to, in the event of, like, whether it's localized or global breakdown of institutions and society, that you're able to function outside of that, right? So, and we had, off camera, we had discussed um, the fact that in light of a really centralized organization of society versus a completely decentralized one, that in a decentralized society, you can lose significant portions of the society through cataclysm or whatever, and the remaining portions would still be able to maintain their integrity and function. And that's because they're independent of each other, not dependent on other locations or other communities to be able to function from day to day. Whereas when you're completely centralized, that means that you require things from outside of the urban sprawl or urban setting that you might exist in. So you require resources brought into the urban centers from places out from actually other urban centers. So it makes then for maintaining the integrity of the society a lot more difficult, because it requires all these things outside of itself to be able to sustain its own network, right? Whereas when everything's decentralized, things function entirely on their own. They don't require any kind of outside influence, or at least it's at a minimum.
Yeah, it would have to be at a minimum. There's no way to completely eliminate like outside resources if you're getting.
No, but um, you don't have to be, not like us. All our major urban centers are entirely networked and dependent on one another.
Yeah, it's really built up around here.
Yeah, so then if you eliminate one, it basically has a negative effect on all of them. And when you're in somewhere like southwestern Ontario, like we are, heavily densely populated areas. So again, it's comparable to any other, cities that you might find anywhere on the planet, where they're dependent on outside resources. And a regular or frequent resupply, right?
Oh yeah, very. Like you think about it, the road I'm on, or we're on now, there's always some transport truck coming by. Usually late night deliveries. It's a weird issue when you have like. It's weird to have the issue that your roads aren't big enough for the supply of the city. It's like, why do you need that city to get larger? Why can't it just be somewhere
Well,
else?
because that's where there's a reason why they call them population centers. Uh, People gravitate towards where other people are. So when you're going to have like a high population density in any place, then that means you're not having resources within the population density, or like stuff that you can access immediately. It has to be brought into the population centers.
Ah,
Right,
that's fair. Because
so that's why you have, transport trucks running constantly. They're part of the supply chain. Remember during COVID when the supply chains broke down, right? And then became the ultimate justification, at least for here in Ontario, to spike all the prices and all the resources that people would require from, like, stores where they would go and get them. So that what
yeah,
they took advantage of the situation, spiked the price of unit prices. So they just again increased their profit margins significantly based on that event, when their reasoning might be kind of fallacious. Like,
yeah, $6 for a liter of chocolate milk. Come on, what are you doing, Bob?
well, it's not me, man. I'd give it away. I don't like chocolate milk either.
But I see your point. Like, it's definitely not reasonable to say, oh, we'll just start new population centers.
Right, like and that might again kind of it might be kind of the failing of the way that we organize, at least in technologically driven societies, that we have these really super dense population centers. The fact of the matter is, especially with like what does Elon Musk have, that network of satellites and orbit, like, to provide, it provides internet access to like regions that aren't really well supplied for
Starlink.
Starlink. Thank you very much. Sorry, I was just completely brain farting. I was going to call it Neuralink, but anyway, having said that, so now we live in this really super interesting position where that you could live very rurally and have access to everything that you would expect in like heavily densely populated areas like big cities and stuff. You can have it's all at your fingertips. So anything that you can want, anything you desire, but you don't have to live within the urban sprawl. You can live in rural communities and still have access to all that stuff, right? And so the advantage of like the rural communities are that you immediate access to nature. You don't have to worry about noisy neighbors or anything of that nature that you would commonly expect within urban centers where they're densely populated. There's people everywhere. There's no getting away from it, right? At least living rurally, you have the opportunity then for like natural silence, quiet of nature, and that it's its own reward. It's actually quite soothing. So having said all that, I'm not sure what that has to do with doomsday prepper culture, but it's an interesting sort of tangent that we've just gone on there.
Right. Well, if we have to look at the variety of ways that doomsday prepper like culture might come up, I think it would have to look at the society we have now. So if we're using our area as an example, one thing we're worried about is it's hugely populated. If something were to happen, that's one consideration.
Right. There's most preppers, their plan is, if there's something that has a negative effect on urban centers, that they just simply leave the urban center. So that their plan's always to go to some kind of rural location and then basically set up camp, right? Like that, like literally, like
Yep.
you're a camper now, right? So, in and of itself, that's actually not that crazy of an idea. But for them, their biggest plan is how they evacuate. So they have a bug out bag which has all their supplies, or like that they can carry, all within reason, and then they have a destination and they have a route mapped out to get to the destination, right? So for many of them, like I said, they have the plan, and most of them take into account that it could have such a negative effect. You might not have access to vehicles. They might just simply not work. So then you're kind of you're forced to on foot have to get to wherever your location is, or by alternative means like no internal combustion engine machines. So it means maybe bicycles, riding your bike out into the woods,
Right.
right? To wherever you have like a designated place to set yourself up.
I was thinking this is a strange concern because, like, you think, oh, with more people, you're safer. No.
No, and people and humans like think about how humans behave when in large groups when they're panicked, right? They we're closing in on the American Thanksgiving. Black Friday's like a week away, and how many stories do you hear every year of people getting trampled,
Yeah.
right?
It's not a huge thing either.
No. And this is just over trying to get the best deal for whatever it is they want to buy.
Hmm.
So imagine that like it's something incidental. Now have that same situation. We have enormous crowds.
So we're all on bicycles just trying to get the hell
Get
out
out of the
here
city.
because everybody turned to animals.
Well, because everyone panics. That's the real enemy then becomes panic, right? That people are incapable of like acting intelligently. They respond purely they're reactionary. So it's an emotional knee-jerk response to what they're confronted with, right? Instead of going, here, is this really the time to be like riding your emotions into decision making? Or should you exercise greater degrees of intelligence and then ask yourself that really straightforward, simple question: what's the smartest thing you could do right now?
Right, because earlier you're touching on modes of transport. Like cars might not be viable.
Right, like because again, it's all dependent on the nature of whatever the incident is that it causes the breakdown of society. There are slower breakdowns where like it's not sudden; it happens over an extended period of time. So then you see people slowly evacuating cities. So then all you'll have are like small remnant of the original population that'll stay in the cities, right? Because they won't venture out because it's way outside their comfort zone. So they'll stay within the context of the city. But then when all the available food and all the stores and convenience stores or bodegas in the U.S., all that stuff gets all hoarded out, or people like consume it all, then there's nothing left, right? So then and never mind the people turning on each other. You could see people succumbing to things like starvation, consumption of dirty water, which would make them horribly sick. So it's not because we would essentially turn on each other necessarily, although that it's not unreasonable to think that people would victimize each other, right? But again, there's a whole host of other things that would be going on. And the funny thing is, I hate to say this, but a positive mental attitude, right? So that if everybody was thinking that here, my survival is dependent on me helping the person immediately to my right and left, in front of me and behind me. And if everybody thought like that, you wouldn't have to be concerned with this shit. We'd all start pulling together, right? But when you think about like science fiction and all that stuff, and the way it presents post-apocalyptic scenarios or the breakdown of society, it's panic-stricken. People, wig out and do horrible shit to each other, and I'm like, none of this has to play out in the way that fiction presents it. And remember, the fiction, the way it's presented to us in movies and television, it's entertaining, but it's like the kind of entertainment that you get from being on a roller coaster. It's thrilling, it's exciting, it's scary, but you're safe. So that's why scenarios like those are as popular as they are and all over entertainment, because it's exciting, it's thrilling, and it's safe. You can do it from the safety of your living room couch. You don't have to worry about the breakdown of society. You can watch it all play itself out uh, in a movie or a TV show or whatever.
I'm just thinking there's probably a lot of interesting resources out there for people that they're interested in, like, long term, how do I prepare myself for like eventualities? Like there's always going to be some breakdown in somebody's personal life that's considered like their doomsday, but
Yeah, but it's not going to
there's
drive you to flee out of the
yeah.
city or start victimizing your neighbors because you want their food.
Yeah,
You
there's
know,
never that situation where it's like,
no,
oh, society's not safe anymore.
right? Or it's reasonably safe. Although, like, think about what happened in California during COVID. Like,
Mm,
you had you know large numbers of people roaming around, just looking to sort of, I don't want to use the word vengeance, but exact some form of like work out their frustrations on other people. It's like, look, if we're incapable of helping each other out, and and already we live in a place that's prone to violence and prone to hatred, and we have random acts of violence and hatred, the answer should be obvious: the random acts of kindness. The most pragmatic and people who identify as being the most practical would argue against what I'm saying, is that it's impractical. To me, what's impractical is that you think that somehow this is going to be reduced to a road warrior scenario and you're going to fight your way out of this unscathed. It's ridiculous fucking shit, right? Like,
yeah, it's funny because they might have more reasoning, but it's not like the best reasoning out there. Like your situation, how you're describing that, it's not necessarily going to be like this huge thing where people are the issue and it's a quick dissolve of
yeah,
the culture.
it could be slow, right?
Yeah, but I was just saying, like, even I had that perspective where it's kind of like that. Because of the culture I grew up in, I have this perspective of, oh, it's going to be a quick thing, it's going to be violent.
Not necessarily. Like you said, you could just see people abandoning cities because there's no resources in the city.
Right.
And at least when you get out into the wild, there's reoccurring plants and wildlife that you can access. And for those among us who are outdoorsman types, like who do fishing and hunting, they would still have a difficult time, but they would be better suited to being out in that environment, right? Like I said, and more particularly those who are like bow hunters or use things like a crossbow, because human ingenuity will allow for them to always have the ability to have arrows and stuff to make those things workable. But with firearms, you're going to be required to have like access to gunpowder, propellant for your bullets, and even if you keep all the empty casings and then kind of repack them and put bullets back into them, like eventually you're going to run out of stuff.
Yeah. You'll need a machinist eventually.
Right. Whereas with bow and arrow and crossbows, that sort of thing, you can make your own arrows and bolts if the worst thing comes to worst, right? Like that you're still capable. Now, again, I'm not offering this up as a strategy. To me, the best strategy is for us to stop treating each other as being incidental, and that we treat each other like with value and worth. Here, I need you to be able to survive. So if we all started looking at each other like that, like we need each other to function, to be able to stay alive. And whether you're living in a stable society or a completely unstable society, it's still true,
Right. And
right?
it's also the solution, no matter where you are on
Right,
that
right. So
scale.
for all the impractical, for all those who think that I'm a realist, I'm practical, they're just practically stupid. It's the kind of reasoning you would expect from somebody who only gives a shit about themselves. Which again, most of us are like that. Whether we acknowledge it or not, it's part of the way that you're socially conditioned, right? We think our tribe's right, our team's best, we know better. That like, and so then it's all those who identify like us, that they're on your side. Well, that's, again, couldn't be further from the truth. Think about how much infighting goes on within any institution, and that most of the time people within those institutions are only that fears what's keeping them in line.
Yeah, and it's fear of like, oh, they're different. They disagree with me. But the way it works is like anybody in your group, there's enough difference that you're more comparable to someone else in a different group.
Right. Again, the reoccurring personality types in every group, regardless of the ideology. So it speaks more to like how much more we have in common than we do than them not. And the things that we don't have in common are usually contrived. They're biases built around
Yeah,
some ideologies. When the fact of the matter is, we're not that far removed. This kind of overlaps with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That all we want is the same things. Regardless of your ideology, you just want someone to care about you, so a warm place to sleep, a roof over your head, access to food, people to love, and people who will love you. I mean, that I just described every human being.
yeah, we definitely look at each other to make sure we're in line too, just to like
Well, again,
have
it's
those.
fear of consequences that that you're going to draw negative attention to yourself for not towing the party line, or not somehow uh, doing like what others would deem that you're supposed to, or you're
Right, but
responsible for.
there is a healthy version of that. Like if you're not able to reciprocate like basic friendliness, that's usually a signal like, hey, something's going on with that person. You
Okay,
help them out.
I'll agree with that. Like that you can't, you're incapable of being helpful, or even willing to being helpful. I mean, then that kind of makes them an outlier, right? So, uh, but a base willingness to, if you want access to safety and security and people who will love you and you will love, you're required to contribute something, so that you're now not just a functioning member, but you're become a significant part of whatever the group is, right? So I don't know what all this has to do with Doomsday Prepper culture, but it's a super interesting sidebar. Uh, because really we're just talking about how we interact within large groups. And the problem is that very typically the things that we identify with end up becoming divisive. They divide us further instead of seeing the things that link us, that are common threads between us. We only see the differences, and I'm like, might it go a long way to explain why we have the problems that we have, and that all that stuff could be circumvented if you adopted a different perspective, change the nature of your relationship, where now you start looking at, instead of the differences, what do we share in common, and then maybe make that the focus. You might be surprised, people. Uh, I know people who argue that some humans are just bad, and I'm like, humans have the capacity to be both good and bad, and whichever one presents in any given person, it's usually trained in them to draw that, whether they're good or bad. They're shitty descriptors, but for the sake of the ease of conversation. Um, so that it's the way that they're socially conditioned or educated or trained or brainwashed into thinking, and the identities that they hold with high regard, that ends up becoming things that divide us, right? When those are things that my personal feeling is they were never meant to be treated with any importance. That they're just interesting things that contribute further to the uniqueness of the individual, but inherently shouldn't be treated as meaningful. It's just an interesting way to sort of characterize or sum up what each individual is, and that it would be more advantageous to focus on what do we commonly share. And then what you would quickly see is that, you know, we view life in pretty much the same way. We all want a quality existence. We want, you know, we want people who care about us, and we want to be able to care about people, right? I'm going, so you think those common threads would be a really powerful way to link us all together, but it's far easier to be divisive. They've got brown hair. Don't like brown people with brown hair. Don't trust them.
I 100% agree with like everything you shared. Like right back to what you said earlier, my initial bias because of my culture, because of the way I was raised, because of the movies, especially because of the movies I watched, I assume like when shit breaks down, it goes terribly.
Yeah,
And
there's no way. That's just entertainment. And
right,
here's a significant problem: is that most people become informed as a result of entertainment.
which is crazy
Right? I
because
mean,
it's a lot of it's just not even close to reality.
no, it's fiction, and it takes a lot of liberties with any information because it's more about entertaining and through storytelling. That's its primary focus. Like that's what it's supposed to do. So it doesn't, for the sake of that, it doesn't. It's not required to be historically accurate or even accurate to the ways things function and stuff like that. Like that's part of taking creative liberties and having creative license with whatever it is that you're doing. It's just the storyteller's way of telling their story.
Yeah, and if you're with a friend and you guys are like pointing out qualities as a joke, that's fun. Like it's reasonable to do that. It's a normal human thing, but it's like so quickly. I would say within the past 10 years, even I went from okay, these horror movies, there's this, there's that. This culture is unique and interesting, to what it is now, which is functionally iPad kids. They're neurotic. They're constantly doing nothing, which is like, okay, how are you that busy doing nothing? They go to school. Not everybody, of course. It depends on individuals within families, within cultures, but it's like it's not like the society is falling apart necessarily as a first cause. It's like the culture and the ideology behind the West, behind like we are scientists. It's like, okay, but we're not philosophers. We're fucking up deeply.
Well, that's 100% true, right? But that's because, again, these ideas or mental constructs take on their own life. They become more important than than somebody else's. So then it becomes a wedge to drive between you and somebody else, right? That because this aligns with a certain group and it doesn't align with another group, and now you can be openly hostile to each other, and that's acceptable because they're not part of your group. Like if you doubt me, just think about what's going on between Israel and Palestine, right? That that these identities that they value so much now can only allow for them to demonstrate aggression in the worst possible ways towards each other, right? So regardless of where you lean, because I know so many people, they'll choose sides, and to me I go, there's no side. It's just everyone losing, right? And it all in the justification of some kind of religious ideology or political ideology. It doesn't matter what the ideology is. They become trapped by that mental construct.
Yeah, you seem to take like a real from the roots approach where it's like, hey,
Well,
civilians aren't making these choices. They're getting hurt though.
right. It's leadership that does that. My approach is always the middle way, which is a Buddhist idea, right? So to me, the middle way is the point where you can balance out two extremes to such a degree it cancels out the extremes. So then what you're left with is the best of what those two separate approaches are. And then and then if you're balanced, they're integrated. They're not separate anymore. So and that's where the real failing is. So much this is no longer about Doomsday Prepper culture, because I know, which is totally cool. This has turned into like a really interesting conversation that I don't want to end now, since this is what we're just talking about. Because
it'll
now
likely tie into that.
well, we're gonna do the Doomsday Prepper stuff on a separate episode, because really what we're talking about is unity and division, which actually was a plan for a completely different episode. But now this episode is no longer about Doomsday Prepper culture.
Yeah, sorry, I kept going.
No, but this is the way. It's an organic conversation. This is the way I like conversations to go. So even though it wasn't what you originally intended, what you end up doing is you end up focusing on something that's worthy of your attention in the course of the conversation. And here we're talking about, what divides us, right? Because here's this thing: we live in these complex social structures called cities, or they're really densely populated with people, and even there, it's always a quiet. It's always this desperate kind of quiet, right? Because everybody congregates into their own communities, and they don't like outsiders coming into their communities. Although some places are better than others, it's still very real. We divide the city up further into tribes, and then even within those tribes, you'd think that there might be unity against anyone outside of those tribes, but within those individual designations or different tribes, there's internal strife and conflict, right? Because nobody agrees, because they're all thinking about their differences, even within the same kind of social group or structure. There's further division because it can't completely agree on everything, and so as a result of that, it further divides us. So if you're looking for a problem, to identify what the actual problem is that we suffer mostly from, it's the fact that we value our identity so completely, and our differences, that it keeps us at bay and keeps us from unifying. And think about this for a moment, that if you suddenly, it's not that you're not supposed to have those distinctions, the things that we use to divide us. It's not that you're supposed to not be red team, blue team, whatever, yellow team, whatever. It's not to treat them seriously, and I don't know if this has occurred to you, but it's a common theme, and particularly when we talk about those, when I talk about those things that do divide us, that the failures is not in identifying with a particular team. It's when you think that particular team or your tribe, you assign a greater value to it than other tribes.
Right. Like if somebody has this strong bias about something that I would consider very trivial, I think it's nice to, try to treat with respect, but at the same time, to see somebody just be aggressively against something because, it's their bias, oh no, it has to be this way. It's functionally it's the same. Red hair, blue hair, whatever.
Yeah, go on.
It's just insane, because that's a sign that they're not really looking at their bias that way.
It's irrational, right? That somehow here, my tribe's greater than your tribe. But wait a minute, aren't our tribes both made up of human beings? Aren't human beings flawed and typically prone to error? Well, yes, on all counts. Well, then what makes your team any better than our team? In fact, when I listen to myself say all those things I just said, I go, they're the same. And it's only because you want to acknowledge these differences that creates the divide. And then in some cases, we're so committed to the divide that we're willing to kill each other over it.
Yeah.
And I'm going, well, here, we're at the cusp of this, where technology is moving at an accelerated pace, and we're doing fantastic things with internet and access to information. Don't you think that perhaps then, in light of all of that we need to start viewing ourselves in a different way. That it might better serve the fact that we have access to all this stuff by not being so tribal, by in fact by seeing what unifies us, so that the unity becomes more primary, right? So unity, and again, unity, because we see the similarities in us, regardless of the language differences, religious, ideological differences, political differences. None of that shit really matters ultimately at the end of the day. It matters to those who benefit the most from it, because they'll keep feeding into that. And it's not malicious, like they're like two-dimensional villains who are twirling their handlebar mustaches. It's not like that at all. It's a polluted way of thinking that's now infected people, that now they think they need to act to preserve, protect it.
Right, like they might be doing it out of good conscience, but
There's
the
not,
reasoning though is bad.
right, poor reasoning.
It shows a lack of conscious, like it's a fear response instead of a conscious
Right.
response.
Okay, so then it's a lack of, then maybe moving forward in this, in with these all these advances technically, and within computers and everything else that we're doing, because we're the first technological civilization, human one, that we're aware of, right? We're breaking, it's all fresh ground. Well, all this ability, or fresh kind of technological innovations require a radically different way of thinking. And so those who would argue that, like, no, you can't change that. You don't have to change the thinking. You have to change your perspective, or the way you relate to that thinking. That it doesn't have to, not everything's a competition, right? But the view is it's always a competition. We're always competing with each other, to the point where now you're willing to trample all over each other to
Right.
that end.
Right, like let's say there's a slow societal breakdown. Eventually, there's a low population in a city center that's pretty big. All of a sudden, you have them going, okay, if we're thinking properly, we're going to work together, build a small community out of this part of the city, and more people will come here. And then we build up the city.
Well, and then you survive, right?
Right.
Like, to me, look, the unity has to be, we have to start thinking more in global terms. That's what the technology's done. In the 70s, when I was a kid, they used to talk about the global village, right? And back then, it might have been a misnomer, might have been inaccurate. But today, in the face of technology, and the technological innovations, and our ability to communicate almost instantly with any part of the world, we really are, a global village. So in that sense, we need to start maybe acting more like villages. Where everybody is aware of everybody else, and they look after each other. It does not mean that it'll be perfect. I'm not a utopian, and I don't like it when people talk like that. We're humans, and we're prone to failure and making errors. So there'll never be a utopian civilization for humans. What there'll be is, it'll be more accurate to say that then civilization for humans will be this ongoing testing of things that work versus things that don't work.
Right, because I could argue with you all day. Like, what metrics are you going to use? How are you going to make sure everybody's paid? Like, I could do all this bullshit to say, how would that work like this? But you just have to say, dude, you're hungry, I'm hungry. One of us is going to do this. One of us is going to work on the fire.
And then we both eat.
Yeah, there's practicality where you have no fucking amount of reasoning you need. Your body's telling you you're hungry.
Yeah, so, and you both need to eat. So one of you's really good at building fires, you build a fire. And then I'll scare up the food, right? So it's an oversimplification, but it's entirely accurate. So this whole idea of of us, that the argument used to be that being competitive was important because it drew out the best in you. But I never saw that. I always saw that what competitiveness did, it brought out really petty behavior in competitors, that they were willing to do, it only works if everybody's operating from the same kind of mental space. But if if there's somebody who's unscrupulous and willing to do anything to for the win, then it makes them prone to poor behaviors and poor choices, right? So this is the problem. I go that you can't have it both ways. You can't sit there and say competition's good for everybody. Yes and no, but again, if it's competition without any kind of discipline, then it just leads to reckless behavior for your own advantage. Right?
I 100% agree because you need the stress to grow.
Right. Like again, it's always been my position that it's only through adversity that you as an individual come into your own. So the struggle that again brings out the best in what you are, right?
I
But
mean, unless you're completely nihilist and you're like, oh, there is no best me. It's like, no, there is.
no, yeah, no, you come into this world uh, rich in potential.
I was gonna say something else.
Well, go ahead.
Like you come in the world, you come into the world like covered in different types of matter. It's gross, but there is something to grow to before you
All
break down again.
Okay. All I meant was is that each and every individual comes with a significant amount of potential, and that struggle helps to realize that potential. But so does education. But again, it's dependent on the way the education's geared. So if it's rote learning, that's memorization, that's not teaching anyone how to think. And what you can do to meet or to draw out greater potential in the individuals is you give them an education that teaches them how to think, not what to think, but how to think, and that then they make a considerable contribution to their own realization of their potential. That's where the real value is. And then the struggle is in trying to realize that potential. So you incorporate different training methods to draw out those skills or to draw out those characteristics out of the potential, right? Because potential untapped is wasted. It's useless. If you're not tapping into the potential, meaningless. It means shit.
Right. I 100% agree because you brought written, wrote, memorized information. It's when it's memorized, you're treating it as if it's your information. You can read a book and then you take the concept from the book and you keep working and trying to figure out in your own words. And then you have conceptualized, you have internalized the concept. You don't need their phrasing, use your own phrasing. And this promotes actual growth, actual understanding and creativity. Like, we are experiencers that adapt the stimulus we get.
That's right. So then why wouldn't you seek out the stimuli, like the best stimuli to draw out the best in what you are? So to me, that's education. So I would even argue that self-educators who come at everything without bias, they're really objective in the way they approach everything, and they're kind of critical in their thinking, they're probably the most or the better educated person.
So would you compare that to something like people that play with the information tend to do better? Like it's their ability to sort of characterize and encapsulate, I think is the word for it.
Empirical evidence or data is always going to be the same, and you can interpret it in any way that you want. You can take hard statistics and bend them to your bias, like to support your bias. People do it all the time.
Yeah, it's framing.
Right. So, but if you teach people to be, bless you.
Thanks.
You're welcome. If you teach people to be critically objective in their thinking, then they formulate their own ideas. Or they'll be exposed to an idea and they'll further flesh out the idea, right?
Yeah.
Like, so to me, there's greater value than in teaching people how to think, right? Because then they're able to, this is the critical part, they're able to answer questions for themselves. They don't require somebody to tell them what they need to know. They can come to their own conclusions on their own. In the disclaimer at the beginning of every episode, that's the thing that I clearly stated, that we want you to come to your own conclusions. And the whole idea is, the hopes is that we trigger in whoever might be listening to this, them to think about these things, to consider them, to suspend their own biases and their own disbelief and go, here, is there any truth to what's being said?
Well, that's the thing. You give examples. Even this video, as it's being recorded, is just an example of the reality out there. Exploring the reality is what puts everybody ahead. It's interesting that people don't. I was just gonna say, it's interesting people don't have this kind of like persuasion where it's like, oh, we all have to do this. We all have to find these niches for ourselves.
Well, because no one's ever told anyone that. What do they tell you? Get a good job, so you can, get a good education so you can get a good job, so you can work real hard, pay off your debt, and then work towards retirement. And then when you retire, you can relax. I'm like, it's a lot of wasted energy, right? Why shouldn't people be, through the entire course of their life, why shouldn't they be doing things that are of interest to them? Why shouldn't they be? And then again, you just got to honor your obligation to society. Well, we don't owe anybody anything. And then if you say that we're obligated, that's indentured servitude.
Well, that's the thing. They say the infrastructure is here, so you're obligated to pay forward to it because you are sustained off of it. However, you have no option to stay off the grid.
Right. So
there's sort of options.
Well, again, but they're making the ability to do something like that. They're trying to make that like illegal, like or slowly eroding the ability to be able to survive outside of the context of society. And the only other option is homelessness. And that, to me, I'm going, you just committed a huge number of lives to this existence that is just basically about subsistence. And within 10, 20 feet of where they are, there's opulence and an abundance which they can't have access to because they're not compliant to society. So your choice is, you take your chances out on the street, or you do as you're told. I don't want to do either.
Right, and it's not legal to take some land, even if you paid for it, and start doing like a hobo community.
Well, I mean,
like that would get shut down.
Well, again, I don't know that that's necessarily the answer too, right? I think that you can't. Here's the thing: you can't do it for other people. Everybody has to come to it on their own.
Right.
And again, that speaks to personal responsibility. That you actively take responsibility for your own existence. Your choice is division or unity, and to get to unity, you have to be responsible. And that means that you see that suddenly that you're not only responsible for you, how do the Christians say it? You're responsible for, or was it essentially you're responsible for your brother or whatever. Your brother's keeper. You are your brother's keeper, right? So to me, that statement rings with truth. That we have to be responsible towards one another as well. It's not enough to just be responsible for you, right? You want community, you want unity. That means that we each take responsibility for each other.
Right, but we can't stand there going, let me impose these rules because I know what's better for you. We can't do that, but we have to stand there and go, listen, if you need help, I'm here. It's a different approach.
Right. And I think that in teaching people how to think, you are empowering them to act in a responsible way. that they and then they'll tend to be more thoughtful in the way they approach things, because they go, it's not just about me. I need to meet my basic needs, but I can't do it at the expense of somebody else. So I can't meet my needs because I took away someone else's needs.
Even worse, you can't be resentful when, like, if I produce bowls and it's not necessary, I'm not going to have business. I have to find other ways to be useful to my community. This is in a society with no, like, metric for money. So I'm thinking,
Well, then you're talking about trade, but then look.
I'm just saying, in a trade scenario, once I become unuseful to the society, I don't just get to be resentful towards the society. I have to go, okay, I'm not doing my part to, like,
Or
sustain myself.
Yeah, so you just have to you have to take a different approach. So you have to be more innovative in the way that you think, so that you can retool whatever it is that you do, so that it does have a niche, that you can make a place for yourself. And that if we help each other out, then with a little help from our friends and helping each other, we elevate each other. So then the quality of existence goes up. It's not about quantity.
Right.
Right? When you're just servicing quantity, then you get the garbage consumables that are produced by third world countries, there's no value in them. That's why they're so cheap. Right? That they're kind of like they're convenient.
Right. They took out the artistry to replace it with, like, mass production.
Right, and convenience, and then that keeps the price low, because they flood the market, and then you can't compete. So somebody creating like a superior quality product now suffers because they can only produce that product at a certain price point, and now you get somebody who's eroding because they can produce, it's a shit product, but because it's comparable to that better quality one, the shit product, because it's affordable, or even cheap, then people will defer to that.
Yeah, like, that kind of monopoly on industry. I always say, like, this stuff can happen under any sort of government.
That's 100% true.
Yeah, but under behavior, under specific personal identity behavior, I'm not a liar. I'm not somebody who's going to crook out my city. You produce bowls at a reasonable price, and then if somebody wants something more artistic, they spend a little more. But that's, like, in a larger society.
Well, again, but I think you can reduce what you're saying to the individual, like, because this is what I advocate for, is the empowerment of the individual. But the individual that empowers themselves also has to take on the extra endeavor of empowering others. It's not enough that you empower yourself. That's just for you. You have to contribute now to the empowerment of others. So if that was the approach that everybody took, then what kind of unity and strength and bond do you think that we would have? And it might even be across the species, never mind national boundaries, that suddenly everybody's seeing each other for what they are. Here, we need each other. And right now, maybe the biggest hurdle to that is, like, degrees of competency. So you see extremely poorly incompetent demanding the same things that the competent have access to. And it's like, it can't work like that. You can't just, it has to be earned. You have to struggle for it. So that means then for the incompetent, they have to struggle for greater degrees of competency.
I mean, unless they want to stay in a low-tier job, low-tier pay, like, stuff like that.
Nobody ever does. What people want, and they daydream about, which you shouldn't do, but it's an inherent part of the way our nervous system works, but I digress. That I can't imagine any individual happy with a no growth kind of work, zero kind of elevation of self as somehow being satisfying. There's nothing satisfying by that. And then those who are like, just be happy. Well, fuck you. I'm not going to hinge all my bets on something that's not permanent. Being happy or experiencing any emotion, all of them are temporary. Why would you actively put any energy into pursuing those things to try and, in the madness of trying to make them a constant state? like we're here. I'm constantly in a state of pleasure or feel good.
Or have enough money for
Right.
drinks. Like
Well,
ridiculous.
I'm just saying. I go that these things are transient, and then you're going to put your effort into that where you can experience satisfaction almost every day. But that's because you actively chose to do something that's rewarding and challenging and engaging and makes you feel good doing. So there's a distinct difference between just wanting to be happy versus uh, having a sense of reward, which brings great satisfaction from jobs well done, from things that you enjoy to do and that you actively pursue to try and elevate yourself. Right? So it requires for us to think in ways that we don't.
Right.
And we're not educated nor trained to do. What we are is educated and trained to service things as they are. So it's not leading to greater degrees of innovation among, like, individually. You have collectively, like, again, Elon Musk is a good example where he's trying to push the envelope of innovation, but even he has to lay off people because, the stuff that he offers, like, not everybody can afford. So I'm like, instead of hinging your bets on an income or an occupation, that actively pursue those things that are rewarding and that to a degree draw out your potential.
Right, because at the end of the day, you have your skill, you have your potential, and you have your innermost thoughts, like your perception, biases, all that. But, but grocery money, you're always going to need that, sure. So you're going to need a job, sure. But it doesn't mean you dedicate your whole life to something that is completely meaningful.
To meeting your basic needs.
Yeah, work
right?
more hours at a job you enjoy for less money.
Or work less and then devote more of your time towards elevating yourself, and in the elevation of yourself, it might give you access and higher degrees of competency, might potentially further down the road give you access to greater incomes that have nothing to do with what you currently do for money.
Right, if you're a happy person and you're working hard, you're having the best week of your life. Just by the fact of working hard, you're in a good place where you like to work. Let's say other things in your life going well. You're I was going to say drastically than dramatically, but yeah, dramatically more likely to help other people out.
Well, because you feel good about yourself.
In every action.
Right. And so to feel satisfied and rewarded means answering challenges, rising up to challenges, to overcoming things. So you can integrate that into your own life. You can choose things that do that for you. Yes, I know that within the context of the given society, all the best hours of the day are usually committed to your job so that you can pay rent and you can have food to eat. It absolutely makes it all the more difficult. But think how much more rewarding it will be than that when you with what little personal time you have, you commit it to elevating yourself. And then you successfully elevate yourself.
I think it's impossible not to elevate yourself if you're truly dedicated.
Well, again, it requires a lot of discipline.
Yeah.
And people don't like that word. It's like it's a dirty word.
Every fucking hour of discipline is a little bit more confidence.
Well, and again, like I said, that you have to figure out what it is that'll provide significant challenge and struggle for you that will elevate you, right? So that requires methods of training. Again, it's ultimately we're talking about higher degrees of competence, right? But it's all for the purposes of like that. Then what the eventual outcome is that you have a society now full of people who are moving towards being realized, and in that they're able to have a greater or deeper degree of appreciation for one another, right? So that's where the real value in unity is. That now we treat each other with significance, with value. That here, like you matter, and that you as an individual, you understand that to be true.
Yeah, it builds like I was gonna say consistency. I forget what it's called.
Confidence. How about confidence?
No, a different word. It's like you're built together. You're a pillar of the community. Uh, it's like consistency, but like fortification.
Well, okay, being fortified as a community, you mean? Yeah, it just means that you have greater stability, greater strength, right? Because you don't treat each other as
Integrity. Sorry.
integrity.
Yeah, that's consistent. It's
Right.
integrity.
Because again, we don't. I don't. It's the kind of thing we don't address clearly nearly enough. Right, that like somehow that we treat it that with lesser and lesser value because it's more important that you get yours before somebody gets theirs, right? So that's unfortunately that kind of consumer competitive kind of mentality, which is fostered in our society. It's a cornerstone in contemporary society that it'll draw out those worst aspects in you. And I'm the first one to tell you competition's healthy. You're not supposed to get into a game wanting to lose. The point is to win. But the perspectives becomes real important, that the win's meaningless, doesn't mean anything, right?
Yeah.
Because if you replayed the game immediately or wait a week and the outcome might be different.
I was thinking there's something really cool about Sisyphus' story where he's pushing the boulder up the hill. It's like the meaning is in the pushing, not necessarily in the dropping of it or the top of the hill itself. I mean, I'm not sharing any new ideas.
I understand, like, when they gave everyone participation medals for, like, sports and stuff like that. I understand what was driving it. The idea was that for the individual to have some sense of accomplishment.
But I would say that has to be paired with genuine effort.
Or, okay, what I was going to say was that it was a way to sort of protect somebody. And you're not, and the argument I would make is you're not doing them any favors. You should just try and teach them to view competition and winning and losing as being something that you're not supposed to treat with any value. What makes competition worth doing is that it's worth doing. It doesn't matter what the end result is.
Right.
It does in the sense that the point of competition is to outdo your competition. But just because you were able to does, again, in and of itself is not significant. Significant in itself, but we've hinged so much on it in the culture, in the society. Think about all the big sporting events, like the in Canada here, the Grey Cup and hockey, the Stanley Cup, and all this stuff, and and they play the best out of so many different games and stuff like that. But if you kept playing that, you would probably see that dependent on the day, one side might dominate the other. So in and of itself, it's not any more meaningful except in that moment. Hey, you won, great, congratulations. Doesn't matter. Like in the grand scheme of things, you think it fucking matters? And this absurd, incomprehensible reality that we find ourselves living in, and we're on this rock that's surrounded by a gas bubble floating that's 90 million miles from this giant nuclear furnace, and somehow, because you won the Stanley Cup or you won some kind of sporting kind of event, that it's meaningful or significant. That demonstrates zero understanding, zero perspective, right? It only demonstrates one thing, just how self-centered and self-serving as individuals we become. And it's a direct product of competition consumerism, not competition by itself. Yeah. It's when it's paired with consumerism. Right, because not all of us are participating in those premier sporting events. Most of us are spectators, and what are we doing? Consuming beer, food, whatever, while we're watching, or worse, you're gambling your money, betting on the outcome.
Well, I was gonna say it's a scaling issue. Like, it's not important to the universe, but it's important to the guy that won the cup. But he shouldn't go. Oh,
But okay, all right,
he shouldn't think that the world should care.
or that it revolves around him now,
Right.
right? For those who win, fantastic triumph, good for you. But it once the win has happened,
Yeah.
it renders itself meaningless. It was only valuable once you actually won.
Right.
But once that moment has passed, so has that one win.
Yeah, it's so funny because there's games, which is in entertainment. We gamify things to make it more entertaining. However, realistically speaking, in the moment, all we care about is the actual experience itself. Watching the tape of the experience itself. It doesn't matter if he won the cup or not, if it's on his shelf or not. The exhibition is what drives humans because it's like that.
Yeah, but then
I don't know what it is.
but then you don't need significant create a significant event
Right.
for that to happen. You could do it virtually in any sports field at any time of the year,
Yeah.
and then you can have the experience of being a spectator or a participant.
The experience itself is like the big event.
All right, so then instead of spending all your time as a spectator, we could all start contributing as participants,
Right.
right?
Instead of centralizing all of the entertainment to like one big massive field
Or one event.
Right. We could just have here's like 10 parks. Now your kids can play instead of staying home.
And now you can have the thrill of that's the thrill of competition. You get out there and you put your best foot forward, and that's the point. It's to put your best foot forward, and then ultimately whether you win or you don't win, like I said, the win's only as good as the moment that you won. But once that moment's passed, it's a thing of the past. It's not relevant. It's not real anymore.
The only thing that's still real from that event is the fond memories and the skill development.
Right.
Which are very important, in my opinion.
But look at sports historians. They'll go on endlessly about, factoids and details about professional sports teams, and that's to entertain the spectators, the armchair quarterbacks. Instead of being an armchair quarterback, why not go and get into a game locally?
Yeah.
Be actually, instead of, thinking that you know better in terms of like how to be a quarterback, why don't you just go out and actually try it yourself?
It would be better for that person that's giving the stats out to give the stats of the games he's played. Because if he's telling other people about some other guy, why don't you just say, hey, this is the game I played, here's my stats, and then as people communicate, it brings them together.
Well, you shouldn't, no one should be surprised by what, in terms of the way that we're talking about viewing competition, that there'd be a lot of people who'd be in opposition to that. But those are the people who are trapped by the bias. They think it's always only about the win. And then for those who are like professionals, about the gains as a result of the wins, right? So the professional athletes, the gains that they get because they won, right? Because they get not just accolades, they're given money, they get material rewards, they're able to demand better, greater degrees of income.
It's a ridiculous amount.
Right. And you got fucking people still, again, no perspectives. People living on the street, children fucking starving. And I'm going, and yet somehow it matters who fucking won this particular sporting event. I'm like, perspective, failure of perspective, the inability to see beyond your own self-interest, right?
Like,
which is inherent part of like a consumer competitive kind of mindset.
Well, I was thinking from that mindset, it's reasonable to go, hey, this is the best of the world. There's only this team here. Like, they're only here for a certain amount of time. They rotate out of the teams. So that's it's a good argument.
No single athlete is
worth a stadium, right?
Or be able to sustain a career beyond a fixed amount of time. They all have like between say 10 and 15 years to make their mark in whatever sport that they're playing, and then those are usually their peak physical years, and then they get replaced by somebody who can outperform them, right? So they only have a limited window anyway.
And they just, because they're sore, they go straight into other careers where they're probably not.
Well, it might open doors and create opportunities for them they might otherwise not have, but for the majority of them, once they retire from their professional sport, they're kind of retired.
All they do is like, oh, hey, buy this product.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why do we need another person like that? I'm just saying, it seems like it's a Tower of Babel. The stuff in there is fun. Don't get me wrong. But when you built it up to be specifically that thing, like you say, like what it became doesn't support what it originally was. It originally was a game for communities.
Well, it's just a way to bond, right? Like all sporting events, right? It was that competition that is a community bond over that, and some would argue that's what goes on currently. But I'm like, it's it's like the celebrity status of professional athletes. I don't know. To me, seems like that it's taken away from this idea of strength and community. It's more about those individuals who are like considered noteworthy because of whatever sport that they're in, and that they're worth your attention. But when you think about it, like all that does is foster more self-interest, right? So where's a sense of community in that, right? And they roll over, like, because again, think about the way the media presents them, that they're constantly seeking the next best thing or the next great at something in particular, right? Like at any whatever the sport is. So in ancient Rome, they used to do that to distract the people, right? So they'd give them bread and the Colosseum, right? So they could be amused and entertained and not go hungry, right? So have we really evolved that much past that now as where we are currently? And honestly, the answer is probably no. We're way more sophisticated than ancient Rome ever was, but but in terms of the way bread and circus to sort of placate the general population, and they had all the problems which they never addressed. Their way of addressing it was just distract the population further and further and further. And that only led to the collapse of Rome.
Right.
So to think that somehow we're free of that is kind of foolish and childish, right? That like if you keep not addressing these things that really do require our attention, like mental health issues, like because they're on the increase. So it should tell you something about the society we live in, that it doesn't foster a good mental health. It actually fosters negative mental health. Well, you think that might eventually contribute to the downfall of society, right? Like economics in the way that they are, that now you have to have like a high-end income just to be able to have access to anything extra, because for most of us we're subsistence level existence, right? Because exorbitant rents, exorbitant food costs, who can afford to pay for that, right? So then it's just you're meeking out an existence. That's not necessarily living, right?
Yeah, I'd 100% agree with that, especially with the way things are now. It seems like the line always is kind of floating around a level where just people can't sustain themselves long term. So it seems like there's like a long period where it's like, oh, things are going well, I'm doing fine. Then there's an event and everybody loses their money because they had to, bulk buy for COVID, or they have to bulk buy for school because they're at that age, they have kids now. There's all these issues where it's like, oh, congrats, you saved up enough money to afford the basic things that you had to get anyways, like education.
Right.
like school supplies, like fucking groceries.
I it actually had me thinking about something interesting I'd heard about ancient societies, like within the last 1,000 years, that they're, at least historically speaking, they couldn't understand why this society's dissolved, right? So there's lots of cultures that fit what I just described. And the most interesting thing I heard, and I'm not sure exactly when the idea was proposed, but that these cultures and societies, the complexity and the demand on the working class became so great that the working class simply abandoned society.
I could see that. Yeah.
And then it contributed to the collapse of the society, because they were like, I don't need here I don't need to be here to serve these petty overlords who just want to continue going on dictating policy, right? And so then people just started leaving the society. Now, I don't know. Now, it's an interesting idea. Now, I don't know whether or not in contemporary society people could do that, but you know, this is a society that has a distinct number of people who are outdoors or outdoorsman types, who like hunting and fishing and camping. So they're people who could potentially adapt to living in more rural settings and having more limited access to things, and then they would contribute portions of their day just to simple, like it'd be simple, I guess not a simple hunting and gathering, but it would be a form of hunting and gathering to survive, right? So again, I don't suspect that people are going to be leaving society in droves, but again, anything could happen, and it's such a weird reality that we find ourselves living in, and yet, here we are constantly at each other's throats, right? So division kills more humans than anything else. The things that divide us, right? Whereas the things that we have in common could completely unify us. But that, again, that's left up to the individual. But if every individual is going, yeah, that's not practical or realistic, then where does that leave you, right? Then are you on the bus going down an alley, and it's a dead end at the end of the alley?
Yeah, there has to be at least some major changes in levels of society that don't typically view other citizens as worthwhile.
Okay, so then where does that occur? And the argument I would make is that it occurs at the individual level. That the
Yes.
individual, that you don't wait for an institution or a great leader to come along to sort of instill that in the society, that every individual takes the responsibility of doing that themselves.
Right. I would say we have to review that person, but you're saying that's the individual, which is true.
Yeah.
But I'm also saying, hypothetically somebody fences off the city.
Well, nobody's fencing off cities.
Yeah.
At least not yet they aren't.
Like, leading up to that, people would have to realize, okay, if we're all a community, if we're all together, we have to reasonably be able to go travel together, start another community. Because that resettlement, being able to do that is going to be what's necessary in a real bad situation.
Well,
in a normal situation, like now, it's just like, be less divisive.
Well, but that's the problem. We live in divisive times, so you can't, this idea of us coming together to kind of work towards, like in light of like something failing, and then somehow we're going to congregate and go on trying to make it work elsewhere. I think that we'd be more prone to turning on each other and completely victimizing each other.
Hopefully, it's a slow kind of burn if there is an issue.
There's no way of knowing. There's no way of knowing. So instead of waiting for the shit to hit the fan and then figuring out what to do, maybe now we need to start thinking differently, period. That we as the individual recognize that it's us, you, the individual person, who's going to make the difference. And that it requires you then to do things and to think in ways that you've never been trained to do, and you've never sought yourself. But now you have to start thinking in different ways. Like, it'll be too late if it completely collapses, right? So now, while it's still here and we still have the ability to reach out and connect with each other, that you can create unity, and the unity simply over the fact that here we all want the same things. We want, our basic needs met. We want a quality of existence where the quality of life is high. And what could be higher than a quality of life where you're spending the duration of your entire life realizing all your potentials, right? It struck me some sort of interesting, the idea that every individual could learn to play a musical instrument or to sing, could become an intellectual to a degree, could develop a personal philosophy, purpose, meaning to their existence, could realize their physical capacity by finding something that they have aptitude for, gravitate towards in terms of physical activity that helps them to realize their physical potential. And then instead of obesity being an epidemic, you'd have more balanced human beings. But, as long as we're divided, we're conquered. So it doesn't matter what the division is. It serves those who benefit the most from the way the society's structured, right? You can't control people who are self-realized. You can't pull the wool over their eyes, but you can easily do it to groups that are completely divided and are suffering from physical health issues and mental health issues. Easy. And all you need to do is squeeze them for a lifetime of labor, right? So they just basically turned individuals who present in an unlimited capacity, who have unlimited capacity, to a very narrow vision of what they are, and then they never realize not even an ounce of their potential, and their entire lives are devoted so that those who are privileged can go on feeling privileged.
Right. It would be better to like bolster the education, just helping these individuals. Like
every aspect of being human. That all of those could be addressed, and that we can live full and wholly realized lives. And again, it's not free from. It's not like it's a guarantee. You're not free from failure or errors. Those things are part of the experience. So you should be okay with the fact that you're gonna fail and you're gonna make mistakes. That's life. It's part of the absurdity of being here. But everybody wants it to be like this pristine picture perfect, because they've deluded themselves into thinking that there's these examples of these people who are popular or have some kind of celebrity status, and they have perfect existences, and which again couldn't be further from the truth. Right?
I was thinking of an example where you have like a fast food worker. He's like slow mentally, so he's going to be changing garbages. He's not going to be working on certain stations for whatever reason. That individual, it's not that it's wrong for him to do that job if he enjoys it. It's wrong that he's put in a position where he's not able to like aspire higher. If there's a community that goes, look, we have taxes, so people go to your house to clean you up, to take care of you, and you get 4 hours at a fast food restaurant. That's not the right way to do it because of perception. It should be your community is taking care of you because your community cares because they can. By the way, you can do this too. So that individual, instead of just being like a garbage cleaner, maybe he's a garbage cleaner with a smile on his face.
All I would offer up in response to what you just said is that whatever the limitations of the individual are, there's still potentials that can be tapped within the individual, and no matter how limited they are.
Right.
But that's the point. The point is that you max out whatever potential they do have. Doesn't matter if it's limited. And no two people will have the exact same potential. right? So all you're doing is maximizing whatever the individual's potential is, and they're a significant part of that whole process, right? That's the other part of it. One is because that's the individual's intention, but we don't train people to seek out the best in what they are, or to elevate themselves to just so that they can draw out all their potentials over the course of a lifetime, right? Because as a competitor, it's about the short-term win, and when you're talking about a lifetime goal.
Right, and it's strange because there might be some individuals, like I use the example of somebody who might be doing a lower tier job that doesn't take as much like ingenuity to do. But there might be some individuals that are like, hey, I want enough for rice and chicken, and then I want to do 20 hours of my own shit. Just 4 hours of work a week or a day.
Or whatever it might work out to. I'm more for the idea that here's the thing, that in everybody trying to realize their potential, that it could be the ultimate service to all of us. Because again, those of us who have extremely high competence, they could present ideas to in such a way or degree that they'll have profound effect on the way the society conducts itself. But nobody wants that if those who benefit the most from the way things currently work, if it's going to upset the apple cart, it's going to overturn their ability to enjoy their advantages, right? So again, that's a competitor's mindset. So because it disregards everybody else, it's only interested in its own gains, and I go, that's not exactly a satisfying way to live. One, because you can, um, it becomes like a hunger you can't satisfy for those who already have all the advantages, right? So then they'll seek other things, power or whatever, and again, all empty pursuits, when the realization of self can bring you great sense of satisfaction and personal reward. And that, maybe that's the point. So that's what, as individuals, we should be seeking. What makes you feel most alive? Figure out what those things are and go and do those things. And again, while you're juggling, trying to meet, your most basic needs, right? That's the struggle of this iteration of society, and this is just an iteration of society. This doesn't represent, it, it scarcely meets the definition of civilization. The root word is civil. Well, you can't be civil if you're competing, right?
We're cohabitants.
That would be more accurate to say, right? So again, it's just, there's so much more to what we could be and what we're capable of being, and that it's not going to come from organizations or institutions or governments or religions. It's going to be because individuals decide to take on the responsibility by themselves, for themselves, and then by extension for everyone else as well. Can I get a time check?
We are an hour and 30 minutes in.
I think this might actually be a good time to bring it to a close. Is there something that you'd like to say in closing?
No, I was gonna make a joke. But yeah, it's so strange. I think a lot of things, or if not most things, are like scaling issues. Like it's that we're seeing our individual perspectives. However, 10 years is huge. 100 years is huge. There's entire
I don't
civilizations.
think that you need that much time. It's you could see it happen within a year, 5 years. It, ultimately, it's about people adopting uh, an idea and
Right.
applying it to the way that they live. That's completely different from what they currently are doing.
My point is, in stagnation, in this current setting, it's not going to evolve into greater things unless we take that approach you're describing.
Right. But that's again because it falls to the individual. So anyone who's listening to this, who's hearing my voice, you have the ability to be everything that you imagine that you could be. But it's going to require you to do things and to think in a way that you've never been trained to do or to think, right? So consider that for a moment, right? But if say for the sake of argument, it became part of the zeitgeist that everybody got turned on to this idea that we can make a difference for each other, and that we're all capable of making a significant difference, and it starts with us taking responsibility for our own existence. That's the idea whose time has come. And I've made this statement before, there aren't enough armies on the planet to prevent an idea whose time has come. So what if the end result of all this technology is an elevation in human thinking, and that what's old is new, that it takes on the persona of, self-realization through taking on responsibility of self, right? Dangerous words.
I mean, like you say, it can happen in an instant.
Look, history progresses in a way that changes. There's slow, subtle changes, and then in the course of all these slow, subtle changes, some catalyst will happen that'll produce like a radical 180-degree turn.
Right. In 6 months, everybody will notice things are better. Within a year, everything will be better.
Or different, right? So again, I live by one rule, right? And it's really fundamental, super basic kind of thinking. It's here, treat me well, and I'll treat you better. So if everybody adopted that approach, well then, what would that look like? You think it might be like people helping each other out, people treating each other with regard. It would make for a radically different society, and it could happen within, like I said, less than a decade, 5 years. But that's the assumption is that it's something that catches on and spreads relatively quickly, right? Which again, it's not unheard of, right? So, and this is the time of firsts. We're breaking all this ground in technology. Then perhaps now it's time to break new ground in terms of thinking, or how we view ourselves and view each other, right? So it's division versus unity, right? Division and unity, and to me, there's value in both. But you'll only find it at the perfect balancing point, the middle way, right? Right. So I think that kind of sums it up. So, okay, excellent. So in closing, I'd like to say, question everything, including yourself, especially yourself. Seek balance. Seek knowledge. Seek understanding. Become a renegade, individualist, humanist, critical, objective thinker. Thank you for your time.